Hello, Dr. Uche here. How are you today? Welcome back. If you are watching on YouTube, welcome back to my channel. And if you're watching on any other platform, it's great to have you. Perhaps you're dropping by again, and that's wonderful as well. I come here to discuss works of fiction and also to share tips and suggestions to help people write, especially their autobiography, memoirs, and such stories, because I really believe in the power of stories to enrich our lives and to share to show our common humanity. And this includes both sharing works of fiction, because stories do matter, and also encouraging people to write down their own stories. So without much ado, today I am reviewing a work of fiction, Ties That Tether by Jane Igharo. It was a wonderful book I enjoyed reading recently, and I'd love to tell you all about it. But first, if you are watching this on YouTube, please do go ahead and hit subscribe. And also, if you hit the notification bell, you will know when I upload new videos. So let's dig right in. Ties That Tether by Jane Igharo is a lovely story that really centers around the immigrant experience. The main character is Azare. Azare is a young girl or a young woman who left Nigeria as a girl. She was just about 12. She'd been growing up in rural Nigeria, because she talks about being in a village with her mom, her sister, and her father. Unfortunately, she lost her dad early. And at the point the dad was dying from a terminal illness, he luckily had a brother in Canada who promised to bring the family over. So after he died, this in fact happened, that Azare, her sister, and mother moved to Canada to live with this brother of her dad, so her uncle, who happened to be a widower with a son. So they pretty much became one family unit. She grew up in the home. We get to see that it was a pretty loving growing up experience. This cousin, was it Jacob, I think, became a brother to her, slightly older. And really, the uncle and the cousin embraced them. So no problems on that front. Now, having gotten to Canada as a teen and her sister just about 2 years older, they had to go to school. So it was a different experience for her getting there as a young teen, having to go to school and having to try to conform and or merge into this new culture, this new way of doing everything, and being at such an impressionable young age where you really do want to fit in when you're a youngster, a young teen, and so on and so forth. So you can see how she had to take on this Nigerian-Canadian persona. She had to fit into this mold. Now, her mother, who had arrived in Canada as a fully formed adult, obviously didn't have the same pressures to fit in. She could afford to get away being herself. She went to school. We get to see that I think she studied nursing, got a job, did quite well. And so somehow the reader is catapulted 12 years ahead. And we now have Azare, a young woman, grown, working, doing well. And we have her sister also doing well. And we have the mom working and thriving. But Azare is now in this situation where she's a certain age, she's expected to meet somebody, date, and marry. Now, she is pretty broad-minded, or she would like to be, but oops, her mother insists that she has to date not only somebody with Nigerian ancestry, but the person should ideally be Edo. Edo is one of the tribal groups in Nigeria, and that is where Azare's ancestors, that's her ancestry, is Edo, and that was her upbringing growing up in Nigeria. So somehow in Canada, she has to find a Nigerian man who has Edo ancestry to date and marry. So you can see that is not very easy. So oops, she has to date. She has to date somebody who's Nigerian ancestry, not even just Nigerian ancestry, but who has Edo ancestry, which is her upbringing. That's the group, the tribal group her family's from. And so her mother tries to set her up on these dates, and she doesn't like these people. She just can't fit in with them. They have a different outlook on life, and that's really not what she's comfortable with. But quite accidentally, she meets a person, a young man, Raphael, who is white Canadian, Spanish ancestry, and they really seem to get on. It's a very interesting one night stand, the way they met the first time, but the way things work, they were obviously destined to be together or destined to meet again. So this man turns up at her workplace, and he is a new hire, right, at her workplace. And so, surprise, this person that would have been a one night stand shows up at her work, and they are co-workers. And so she's trying to juggle this thing with this Spanish Canadian man who obviously cares a lot for her, and her mother's preference that she date someone who is Edo Nigerian ancestry. And it's a struggle for this young woman. Her mother is very inflexible about this. We get to see as we make progress in this book, incredibly inflexible. She is not willing to entertain any thought of anything else, but the man has to be Edo Nigerian. And so, oops, turns out there's an unplanned pregnancy from that one night stand. And first of all, it takes Azare forever to even tell Raphael that, hey, that first time we met, that one night stand, we had sex, I got pregnant. She was struggling with this because they thought they used protection and all that, but somehow it didn't work. So eventually, the way it leaks out is quite unplanned. I'll let you read that part to figure out how that happened. So this truth comes out, and now everybody knows her mother, her uncle, her family, her sister, her cousin, and Raphael. And so it's a shocker, but it's nice how Raphael eventually takes it all. His family gets to know. They're very pleased and excited. We don't get the sense of any animosity towards Azare at all. They're very happy that she came into their brother's life. But turns out there's a secret he's keeping. And it takes a while. I have to say that here, the author made it seem bigger than it was, actually. The way they made it seem like it was a big deal, but turned out it wasn't actually anything bad about Raphael, but it was made to look that way. So, obviously a huge secret, something he didn't want to share with Azare, that became a problem. It came in between them. And when this pregnancy is discussed at among Azare's family members, her mother makes it clear, I'm not having that. You are not marrying somebody who's not Edo Nigerian. You choose him, you lose me. I disown you. And oh my goodness, she's actually serious about this, because Azare chooses Raphael over a certain guy, Elijah, who has known her since she was much younger, a younger teen in growing up in Canada, who has some really nasty history with her. But he turns up a doctor now. They're all grown up, and he wants her. He's like, even with the baby, we'll find a way to tell stories about how the baby came to be lighter skinned, because obviously the baby would be mixed race. But I'm okay. I'm still willing to accept you. I love you. I care for you. But this is all messed up. That's not who she wants. And the mother is trying to force this man on her just because he's Nigerian. And so she chooses Raphael, and the mother really is serious. She really does disown her, stops taking her calls, totally goes silent on her, won't communicate. And so she goes through this pregnancy without her mother's blessing, without her mother's comfort and love. She's all on her own. But, at some point, she actually starts to get the feeling of, again, this secret that Raphael is keeping from her. And this becomes really a problem for them, a wedge that really splits them apart. At some point, she says, I just can't do this anymore. Hey, you're not even being honest with me. Look what I've lost being with you, but you cannot be honest. So this really becomes a problem, and they go their separate ways. This is before the baby is born. But you know how things work out? Eventually, Raphael is able to face facts and actually come back to his senses and say, okay, so this is what happened. I really do love and care for you. And as I said earlier, it turns out it's not really much of it's not an offensive sort of secret. It's just something really sad that happened in his life prior to him meeting Azare. So I don't know why they made it seem like it was a big deal, bigger than it actually was. Obviously a heartbreaking event, but not a big deal in the sense it wasn't something bad he did. It was just something really sad that happened. So they get back together. But the most beautiful way this book ends is that Azare is able to confront her mother and say, look at you, look what you're doing. You're making me stick to some promise I made to my long gone father when I didn't know any better, promising him that I wasn't going to lose my culture, promising him I was going to marry somebody Nigerian. But look at you. How much of what my dad would have wanted are you doing? So there was a very tricky situation there that I want you to read for yourself. But she was able to confront her mother and say, marrying someone outside my culture doesn't mean I'm losing myself. And you have to respect who I want to marry, who I want to be with. And you have to give up the idea that the way I would have been growing up in Nigeria is the way I am today, years into residency in Canada, obviously at this point with a mixed hybrid culture. So the mother had to face that, and it ended in a nice way. You could tell that she got back with Raphael. They had this daughter, and they actually were expecting a second child at the end of the book in the epilogue 5 years later, and obviously had a loving relationship with her mom back in the picture, the uncle and the whole family. So this book really explored, or rather really focused on the immigrant experience, the experience of a child getting to a new country and having to grow, having to stay true to their origin, but obviously absorbing the new aspect of the new country. And then growing up into adulthood and then getting into relationships and really struggling with what they would do versus what their mother would rather have them do, and eventually finding a way to confront that parent and say, you just got to accept me for who I have become. And it was very telling for me as a child who I like to say that a person of a hybrid culture. I'm a third culture person. I grew up in 3 different cultures. And so there is no way I would say that I'm 100% of anything. I think that while I'm able, or while I would agree that there's likely something lost in merging cultures, I don't think it's necessarily always a bad thing. And there are many people who have mixed cultures, and I don't think that mixing cultures necessarily makes you lose your origin. You can very much embrace your origin and know where you came from or your ancestry, but also be accepting of what you are, what you've become by virtue of your life experiences. And I think that it is a beautiful thing to once in a while come across somebody with a hybrid culture. I think that it really gives me, I would say, it makes me an observer. I'm able to observe and compare things because I don't fully blend into anything. So anyway, that's just a little piece. I loved the book. I loved what she tried to highlight. I suspect it's a pretty common thing. People who have emigrated to different cultures wanting their children to stay like what they remember, but that is not always realistic. So Ties That Tether by Jane Igharo. I hope that you may consider reading it, and I'd love to know what you think. If you do read it, leave a comment below. I'll see you next time I come to review a book or discuss a writing and publishing tip. Take care. Bye-bye.